brazen and violent.
In a daring move, a victim refuses to back down.
My jaw dropped.
He realizes, I gotta get out of here.
A man armed with an assault rifle.
A brave security guard prevents disaster.
Instead of running away, he runs right into the mix.
I couldn't believe what was happening.
What a nightmare it has been for this family.
Arsonists with gas cans on a rampage.
All masked, covered up. Is this revenge? Jilted lover? What is this?
And a crossing guard becomes a hero.
Risking her own life.
She's never had a car get that close.
I just remember pushing her.
Disturbing videos we can't stop watching. A bold daylight robbery.
It's really difficult to watch.
Turns into a fight for survival.
Obviously, there's some bravery here, there's some courage, but also I think about how easily good days can turn bad. You see this white Tesla pull into the parking lot. The driver parks his vehicle, but almost immediately after that, you have a silver Infiniti pull into the parking lot as well behind them.
What happens next is very chaotic and happens so quickly.
So at this point, the victim, the driver of the Tesla, decides to act. He's not going to be a victim. He engages with the suspect.
This Tesla driver is not going down without a fight.
The victim doesn't hesitate, even with a gun pointed right at him.
And at that point, he realizes, I got to get out of here, and he proceeds to run off camera while the suspect follows him.
As the two men run out of view, pay attention to what happens next.
Now, it seems like this is a tag team effort from the robbers, but I don't really know how much of a team this is.
Seconds later, the gunman reappears.
We don't see what happens off camera, but clearly a fight ensues because when the suspect comes back on camera, he's missing his shirt.
And it seems this parking lot standoff is only the beginning.
The victim is able to break away from this assailant, trying to get to safety, but unfortunately for him, the assailant gets back in his car, picks her up, and then suddenly, the moment of this collision, my jaw dropped.
And if you notice, in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, as the victim is hit by the Infiniti, he goes up into the air, but also if you look, you can see that the firearm the suspect originally had has flown in the air and landed on the ground in the bottom right-hand corner. What this tells me is that while the individuals were off camera, the victim disarms the suspect.
But the attacker doesn't even seem to realize his gun was left behind.
What's really crazy is, at this point, after striking the victim, the suspect exits his vehicle and tries to rob the victim again. He's still fighting back.
This victim is so impressive because he literally is on the ground after being thrown through the air and is putting up a fight. I can't imagine ever doing that. I can't imagine anyone doing that, but he is.
Incredibly, even after a man tries to rob him, then plows right into him with his car, this victim still fights back.
Eventually, the suspect realizes this guy is refusing to be a victim. He gives up, he hops back in his vehicle, and he takes off.
Police arrive, and the victim is rushed to the hospital and treated for non-life-threatening injuries.
I'm glad to see the victim is okay. The situation could have been a lot worse. I'm very impressed by his courage to fight back.
By the next day, the footage is everywhere.
Brazen and violent. That robbery took place in this parking lot, and it was all captured on security video.
The West Hollywood mayor even uses Instagram to plead for help.
We need to work together with our sheriffs to ensure that they have what they need to solve this and other crimes.
And unfortunately, this assailant is still out there. No one was able to find anything on him because he was able to get away. And of course, all attention on the victim to try to help him out because he was, thrown through the air.
It's very apparent that this suspect has an absolute disregard for human life. He has one mission and one mission only, and that's to take whatever he can from this victim. Fortunately for him, he faced someone that refused to be a victim. If the suspect is caught, he's looking at a plethora of charges: robbery, attempted murder. He could be going away for a very long time.
And what remains unclear is why the victim was targeted in the first place.
My feeling right now is that the robber was following this victim from somewhere, the way that they pulled in right behind him in this parking lot.
When you have a routine, you can sometimes get complacent. They're looking for victims of opportunity, and if that may be their sign to take advantage of you.
But there is one takeaway from this viral video.
No car, no amount of money, no item is worth your life. So if you're faced with a situation where someone approaches you with a firearm, if they want a car, give them the keys. If they want your wallet, give it to them. Again, those items can be replaced. Your life can't.
From one intense robbery to another.
In a tense scene, a man armed with an assault rifle. Heroic actions of a security guard.
Multiple people could have been killed.
Here, a quiet morning turns to chaos inside a drug rehab clinic.
A man comes inside with a high-powered rifle.
At first, the staff members inside the lobby don't notice the gun.
There's a security guard who's standing there next to a window.
The guard is the man wearing a mask in the middle of the screen. He has a jacket over his uniform.
The security guard is clearly startled.
It's important to note that this security guard is unarmed.
Typically, security guards are not trained to disarm an armed suspect. If they were, then they would be armed themselves.
With no hesitation, Reynaldo Beckford risks his own life.
Instead of running away, he runs right into the mix. His actions are heroic. Anytime there's any type of gun involved, it's a high-stakes situation.
But this isn't just any gun. It's an automatic rifle, capable of firing multiple shots at once.
If you look at the left of your screen, you can see the men struggling. The security guard is trying to wrestle this gun away.
Now, about 20 seconds into the struggle over this AR-15, a second security guard assists in apprehending the suspect.
The gun goes off again, 2 more times during the struggle. Thankfully, no one was hurt.
Worst scenario, he would have continued to fire shots throughout the clinic. And multiple people could have been shot, injured, or killed.
While someone in the clinic dials 911, the 2 security guards manage to force the gunman out the door. Stunned, a man parked outside begins filming on his cell phone.
He let go 3 shots. Oh, he shot.
And it turns out these aren't the only shots this criminal has fired that morning. The security guards hold the gunman down until police arrive. He is identified as 48-year-old Jeremy Griffin.
The same suspect was linked to another shooting that happened prior to this incident.
The frightening story dominates the local news.
Police say that clinic was one of 2 sites the same man fired shots at within a few minutes of each other.
A Buffalo man faces a long list of charges after police say he shot a woman in the leg and then opened fire at a Lower West Side methadone clinic.
Corner of my eyes, all I saw was the person and the rifle. And I couldn't believe what was happening. I had him and I had the rifle. I was just saying, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus.
Footage of the struggle goes viral, and praise for Reynaldo pours in.
One person said, "Give that man a raise," commending his actions. And so there seems to be a lot of support for the unarmed security guard.
The woman Griffin shot before storming into the clinic is treated for non-life-threatening injuries. And Griffin is indicted on 5 felony counts, including attempted murder. The motive for both shootings turns out to be the same.
By all accounts of our investigation, we believe this was an attempted robbery seeking drugs.
The security officer was very brave and courageous in his actions, not being trained, but knowing the danger that could come upon this agency or this clinic if he did not disarm them was absolutely bravery.
He prevented someone from getting killed that day.
When he talks to news reporters, Reynaldo says he doesn't consider himself a hero.
That's the business that I'm in, to save and protect. And that's exactly what I did. Nobody lost their life. Nobody got hurt.
But even if no one ends up seriously hurt, being attacked out of nowhere is always terrifying.
This really feels like a crime of passion or a crime of vengeance.
One of them is fully engulfed in flames.
Devastating arsons.
I was shocked. I was in disbelief.
That take a personal toll.
This happens right in front of this family's house.
Shortly after 2 a.m., a car alarm blares outside a suburban home. Rushing to the window, a young father sees the family's car engulfed in flames.
It's the car alarm and the sound of the fire which wakes this family up. What they do is they want to protect their children and their families and themselves as much as possible, so they move to another area of the house.
They call 911 and the fire department quickly arrives to extinguish the blaze. But the biggest shock is revealed on the family's home security camera.
When you see this person coming up all masked, you know that they don't want to be identified.
After throwing a gas can into one of the cars, the masked arsonist escapes into an idling getaway car driven by an accomplice.
Who is this fire starter? Why are they doing this?
This happens right in front of this family's house. Not just one vehicle, but a second vehicle.
The story hits the local news.
What a nightmare it has been for this family. They say they are still on edge.
A homeowner in Corona is living in fear after someone set a parked car on fire near his home.
And explodes online. Is this a random attack or is it targeted?
You have to think, is this revenge? Jilted lover? What is this?
This family is lucky in the sense that the fire did not spread to another home, to their home, to other vehicles. That car alarm really saved the night.
Police are not revealing any details about the ongoing investigation and are asking for the public's help to solve the case.
I spoke to the Corona Fire Investigations Unit. Everyone out there could watch this video, zone in on the suspects who are seen on this tape. And if you have any information at all, please pick up the phone and call the Corona Police Department directly.
It's possible this is the work of a serial arsonist. Earlier that year, and just 1 hour away, another family is victim to an almost identical crime.
A guy pulls up to a parking lot and sets fire to all of the cars.
Again armed with a gas can, this man torches car after car parked in front of an apartment building.
One of the people who lives at this building is watching this unfold on a Ring camera, and she immediately alerts her father, who's inside the building, and they spring into action.
As cars go up in flames, a woman and her father desperately try to contain the damage.
They're grabbing hoses to try to put out the fires. It's really dangerous.
She is alerting residents, and he's moving outside. At one point, you even see this man with a fire extinguisher going after these flames and trying to put this fire out. One of the worst case scenarios is that the building could have caught fire.
Police still don't know who this guy is.
The bold crime blazes across news screens and the internet.
I mean, what possibly do you have to gain by doing something like this? Is it to instill fear? Is it to watch the incident unfold? We don't know if this attack was personal.
This arson also remains unsolved, but there is one clue.
Police say that the suspect could be someone in that community.
Still, these incendiary crimes are baffling.
The person committing the arson is getting nothing out of this. There's no reward, no financial reward, no monetary reward at all. So it has to feel just good, which is what's so creepy about it.
And usually when people do things with no reward, it's because they are selfless heroes. Here, an everyday morning routine takes a frightening turn.
Risking her own life to save a middle school student.
At this point, I'm sure she's thinking, I need to save this child's life.
What we're looking at right now just seems like a typical day near a school. It's footage from a bus of a crossing guard, Corporal Annette Goodyear, guiding kids to cross the street.
Been doing it for 14 years. I was doing the morning detail. It was a rainy, misty day, so I made sure I put on my rain gear with my rain hat because we knew rain was coming in that day. I had already stopped traffic a couple of times letting children cross the street. I saw the young lady coming to the crosswalk. I stopped traffic coming in the one direction, looked down the street in the opposite direction.
As she's performing her duties, she puts her hand up to make sure that the children are crossing safely.
At that point, I decided after no traffic was coming to just have a conversation with the girl as she's passing by me.
But that's when she notices something.
So I'm turning, and out of the corner of my eye, I could see this vehicle coming at us.
In that split second, Annette throws the girl to safety and takes the brunt of the hit from the car.
I just remember pushing her, and then the next thing I know, the car is clipping me in the knees. I'm going up on the hood of the car, and I'm rolling off onto the ground. It just seemed very slow-mo. It was just very strange.
Cannot even imagine what she's feeling.
I remember lifting my head up, looking for the child to make sure that the child wasn't hurt in any way. I saw her standing up. Once I realized she was able to stand up, I just laid my head back on the ground.
Miraculously, the young girl is unharmed.
She just kind of started looking back and forth from me to the school, like she didn't know what she should do at that point. She was in shock.
The driver of the car is also shocked by the accident.
I could hear the car door close, and I could see her run around, and she's like, sorry, I didn't see you. And I was just like, ma'am, please don't say anything at this point.
Now, the driver says that she did not see her. That is possible, but we all know that our minds are pulled in another direction when we're driving. Cell phones, traffic, and it is rainy weather.
But I mean, in a bright colored poncho in the middle of a street, I don't really know how much I believe that.
There's no way they could not have saw me. I'm in a huge orange raincoat. It's like a traffic cone. At that point, I'm noticeable. It's not like I'm just standing there wearing all black and nobody's gonna see you.
A few moments later, help arrives and Corporal Goodyear is rushed to the hospital.
So it's just basically just going through any other thing at the hospital. You make sure nothing's broken.
But Corporal Goodyear isn't thinking about herself.
She is in the hospital that night, and right when she is released, she goes to the kid's home to make sure the kid is feeling okay and doing all right. What a saint.
That in itself shows the character of Corporal Goodyear.
I'm here at this crossing guard area to make sure these kids get across to school safely and home safely. So it's just what we're supposed to do. And it just seemed second nature at that point to make sure that she was safe. Her little sister had made this little flowering pot that she gave me. I was trying not to cry. The students started getting teary-eyed, and I'm just like trying to hold it in. It just made me feel more closer to the students that I really love dealing and working with every single day.
Her heroism makes the local news.
And Corporal Goodyear tells us in her almost 15 years of being a cross guard, she's never had a car get that close to the crosswalk.
A few days later, the superintendent of the local school district praises her on Twitter. She also accepts the Maryland Governor's Award.
Well, just days after being hit by a car, a police officer working as a crossing guard is honored and back on the job.
I kind of felt that I didn't deserve it. It's not why we do this job. You do this job to just make everyone feel safe.
Corporal Goodyear put her life on the line. She wouldn't say this, but this makes her a hero.
The driver is charged with multiple traffic citations and ordered to pay a fine. And everyone is relieved that the accident wasn't worse.
Watching this video, I was just terrified that something like this could happen at a school when there's so many kids around. But then it's so good to know that there are heroes walking around every day.
Two bumbling burglars.
Criminals who just can't get it right.
Setting fire to themselves.
What are we doing?
A terrifying gunfight between unlikely foes.
The father returned fire in an obvious fight for his life.
Most families don't have shootouts.
A chilling abduction in broad daylight.
You don't think when you're at work that something like this is going to happen.
A premeditated attack.
And a man fed up with thieves takes matters
I was so scared.
into his own hands.
It could have gone a lot of negative ways.
You see this individual running for his life.
This looks like a scene straight out of a movie.
March 19th, 2021, Coweta County, Georgia. A quiet Friday is about to turn into mayhem.
We're in rural Georgia. A young man walks up to a home. It looks like maybe he lives there.
But things quickly turn violent.
You see this individual running for his life as he comes out of the house, and another individual chasing after him with a gun.
The men fire at each other repeatedly.
This is so chaotic. We have no idea why these two people are trying to kill each other.
My initial impression is something went on inside, maybe a drug deal gone bad, some type of assault, and this is the aftermath of that.
This looks like a scene straight out of a movie. They seem really desperate to survive. They're dodging each other. They're really both afraid. They're trying to figure out the best way for them to stay alive in this situation.
The really scary thing about this ordeal is, first off, who else is inside that home that this individual is now firing into? Secondly, who is in that surrounding community? You have other families, potentially young children. You can see that they're not really looking where they're shooting. They're just firing aimlessly.
The gunfire finally dies down when the older man escapes into the house to dial 911. Authorities quickly respond and arrest 26-year-old Mario Paul Clark.
Shockingly, later we find out that this combo of individuals is actually father and son.
It all began when Mario showed up at his dad's house armed, and when he refused to relinquish the gun, his father got his own pistol. Video of the shocking father-son shootout quickly hits the news.
It was all caught on the family's home security camera.
The dad saw the imprint of the gun in the son's clothing. He was trying to disarm his son.
The video goes viral, and viewers are stunned.
The father returned fire in an obvious fight for his life.
Mario is charged with aggravated assault and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime.
The son is clearly the aggressor. He is there on a mission. And the father, he's trying to stand his ground and likely thinking, I don't want to hurt my son, but I also don't want anyone else in this house to be hurt, and I don't want to die.
His dad makes arrangements for him to enter a mental health facility rather than serve time behind bars. It's a sobering end to a shocking family dispute.
All families have conflict, but most families don't have shootouts.
All criminals have foul intentions, but as you'll see in these next unbelievable viral videos, not all criminals have smarts.
Talk about a plan going up in flames.
His MO is that he's just not very good at it.
Crime doesn't always pay, especially if you're bad at it.
I think that we watch a lot of heist movies and we think of criminals as being super intelligent. But honestly, I believe 99% of them are pretty dumb.
It's 4 a.m. at a Miami iPhone repair store when a robber wearing a curious disguise smashes a counter.
And what could go wrong? I mean, I have a box protecting my identity.
But the boxed thief has not thought this through.
He didn't even try to secure the box to his head, so at one point, he shows his full face to the camera. So what are we doing here, sir?
The footage is all over the news.
Florida police arrested a man after a bizarre robbery at a phone repair store. The busted box thief. There you go.
And even the store owner gets a laugh out of it.
When I received a call that somebody had broke in, I was really frustrated. But when there was a laugh on my face when I saw the recording.
With more than 76,000 views, the police quickly figure out who the box thief is.
Somebody recognized him from the surveillance footage.
33-year-old Claude Griffin Jr. is arrested and charged with grand theft, burglary, criminal mischief, and resisting an officer. The masked men in this California video approach an immigration and tax office, but they're not here on business.
One of the criminals you see, he's throwing accelerant everywhere and on anything.
It even splashes the security camera. And then,
Talk about a plan going up in flames.
I'm like, they're so bad at being criminals, but then I'm also like, are they okay?
When the surveillance footage hits social media, it gets thousands of views.
2 men were caught on camera setting fire to his business and themselves.
And these guys are not likely to try this again.
Karma came back to bite them. They ended up with pretty severe burns, which is gonna be a lifetime of problems.
In China, a surveillance camera shows 2 men nonchalantly walk up to a building with bricks in their hands. But when they throw them, things backfire horribly.
I viscerally felt the brick the moment it hit.
He was completely knocked out, and now his friend has to think, well, do I leave my friend here and possibly he turns me in, or do I have to drag him so we can both get to safety? A hit like that, he could have a concussion, he could have actual permanent brain damage.
Footage of the brick fail makes international headlines, and the video gets 300,000 views.
Cops in China say 2 bumbling burglars did their jobs for them.
And coming up next, more bad guys who take the definition of dumb criminal to a whole new level.
He's just not very good at it.
Criminals may know what they want, but they don't necessarily think they're wrongdoing through. In Texas, it's a viral ATM fail. 2 men try to take an ATM out of a courthouse.
If I was gonna steal an ATM, I would think go to a convenience store or go to somewhere that is not a courthouse. It's clearly amateur hour. He's locked himself out of the car. So he's like trying to tie this rope around the ATM, and then he can't get back in the vehicle, so then he just jumps into the bed of the pickup.
They get away with part of the ATM, but no cash.
These guys, I think, should have spent a few more months at the drawing board because I would give their preparation, planning, and execution Fs across the board.
The bumbling burglars make international news, and they go viral. Making their crime even more pathetic, they leave DNA evidence behind, which leads police to break up an organized crime ring.
The group hit up county buildings 6 times in 6 weeks, causing more than $200,000 in damage.
In Atlanta, customers at a nail salon have 0 tolerance for dumb criminals.
It's the middle of the day. There are people waiting to get their nails done. You can see the women are chatting. And then out of nowhere, this guy comes in.
The unwelcome patron appears to be armed.
There was an initial moment of shock of what's happening.
But nobody budges.
This is the quintessential example of unbothered. I can't tell if they're just thinking, I've been in Atlanta long enough to know when there's really a gun in a plastic bag and that doesn't look like it.
The manager even casually answers the phone, as if the robber isn't there.
Something tells me it was the phone call that made the robber realize this might not be in the cards for me.
He tried everything he could to make these people react.
Give me the money! Where's the money? Everybody give me everything! Where's the money?
There was something about this guy that just did not give off hardened criminal.
Deflated, the robber turns and walks out the door.
He had to just walk out of the salon empty-handed.
The only person who was robbed was him of his dignity.
The video explodes on social media with millions of views.
Police in Atlanta are looking for a robbery suspect, and his MO is that he's just not very good at it.
2 weeks later, police arrest Stefan Harper, charging him with robbery.
Where's the money?
I know the internet has been around for a long time, and it's hard to say what the best videos on the internet are, but this might take the cake.
Everybody get down! Give me all the money! It's got the money!
Committing a crime in a place where surveillance cameras are bound to record you isn't wise either.
Shocking attempted kidnapping.
Force her towards the store's exit, like something out of a movie.
January 17th, 2023, Bartlesville, Oklahoma. It happens in broad daylight.
Don't assume because you're in a public place or a well-lit area that you're immune to this type of attack.
Security cameras capture a man approaching an employee.
This is a woman who's working at a hardware store.
At first, she thinks he's a customer, but things quickly turn violent.
He's trying to move her.
This was a premeditated attack.
She's locking her legs, she's holding her arms up, and he's pushing her, and her feet are sliding.
This is horrifying. The man is trying to force her towards an exit.
You got to think about the type of mindset of an individual to do something like this, to think they're going to take someone against their will, and God knows what their intentions are if they're successful in doing so.
But she fights back, escaping just in time.
She caught a co-worker's attention who was able to come and help her.
What you can't hear on this tape is this woman crying out for help. Thankfully, another employee hears her cries for help and was able to scare the guy away.
Ominously, police say the kidnapper planned to drag her into an SUV parked outside.
This offender strategically placed their vehicle at a location outside the outdoor area of this hardware store so that they could push this employee out of the store and immediately into their vehicle.
Before police can make it to the scene, the suspect races out an emergency exit door, then flees in the red SUV. The victim, who is unharmed, has no idea who the man is or why he was trying to abduct her, and police are stunned by the brazen attack.
You run across something like that and you're shocked and you're really surprised.
I've been here 10 years and this is my first encounter with an actual abduction or kidnapping from a place of employment.
If she had gotten into that vehicle, this could have been a really bad situation.
Police used surveillance footage and Facebook to identify the man, 39-year-old Quincy Wilson. The Jeep he fled in is located in an alley with the license plate missing. Inside, they find the clothes he was wearing in the video.
At this time, we have an active warrant for Mr. Wilson for attempted kidnapping.
Just 1 hour after they hold a press conference, police arrest Wilson at his home in Tulsa, 45 miles from the hardware store.
When you have something of this caliber, you really want a resolution. You want somebody in custody. You want just, to let the public know that this person's in custody and they don't have anything to worry about.
Wilson is charged with attempted kidnapping. He never shares his intentions with police.
We really don't know the motive. Could it have been sexual in nature? Could it have been part of a larger organization? We may never know.
The frightening story tops the news.
The suspect is in custody.
They say that the suspect parked his SUV here in the secluded loading area right next to an exit, and they believe that this was proof that it was planned in advance.
The shocking video goes viral, making people fear that they aren't really safe anywhere.
You don't think when you're at work, especially at a larger retail store or a larger hardware store, that something like this is going to happen.
And it's a chilling reminder to never let your guard down.
No matter where you are, is to be conscious of your surroundings, be cognizant of the people you're interacting with, And make sure that if something like this happens, you do whatever you can, anything in your power, refuse going with them. You never want to go to a secondary location.
This could happen any city, any store, any time of day.
Coming up next, shocking video of a man who fights back against criminals who steal at all times of day.
Put down! Put down! Down!
He knows that there's trouble.
No! Put down! Put down!
2021, Seattle, Washington. For years, thieves have been stealing from the garage and parking lot at Gerard Ty's apartment building, and he's fed up.
It was happening so frequently, I just felt so violated.
Determined to stop them, he sets up security cameras.
There's no pass-through, so if they're going into my parking garage or parking lot, there's one way in and one way out. I have 3 cameras set up. Each camera has a different notification on my phone. That will wake me up and get me looking to see if someone's in the area.
Sometimes Gerard yells at the intruders to scare them off.
Hey! Get out of there!
Get out of there! What's wrong with you?
You want to try getting in the car again? No, that's not your car!
Other times, he's forced to come outside half-dressed.
You come down here in my underwear because you're shooting around in the garage.
Or prepared to fight.
Yeah! Huh? What are you doing? Come on!
Frustrated, Gerard starts posting his videos online. He also puts up a sign, warning, trespassers risk serious bodily injury. And these criminals quickly find out that he is not playing around.
Put down! Put down now! What the thing down?
Gerard is wielding a gun. He's a legal gun owner, but his intention is only to frighten the criminals.
I'm not gonna go down there and just start shooting. I've never discharged my weapon at anybody, towards anybody, ever. They drove up in a U-Haul with the sole intent of stealing a motorcycle. I knew that there was more than one person. If there's only one person, I'll go with a bat. If there's more than one person, I will go with a gun. People ask me, it's like, God, I can't believe you went down there in your underwear. That was so funny. There's nothing funny about it. I was so scared, and I knew the gun I went down there with, if I would have shot somebody, would have killed them.
Word about Gerard's vigilante action soon gets around. But instead of scaring them, the bold criminals keep coming.
You can tell the second the thief realized where the camera was, because then he tries to jump out of frame.
Gerard heads down to investigate, but this isn't business as usual.
There's another person in this video. This homeowner may not exactly know what he's walking into, but there's trouble.
He could be armed. It could have gone a lot of negative ways. The homeowner comes in really hot and fired up.
The thieves try to make a break for it.
No!
And whatever their intentions are, they play nonchalant.
I don't know what you were trying to do. I don't give a dude.
The person who is inside the garage says, I'm not really doing anything.
And then that's when you hear me say, you know, I got you on my camera.
No, yeah, you were. I got you on my camera.
They pulled up in a nice car, and there were 3 people total, 1 in the back seat, 2 in the front. Then you start to hear this pounding sound, and that's me kicking the car. The passenger attempted to open the door, and I kicked it closed. He tried to open it again, and I kicked it closed again. And by the time they left, the passenger side of the car was dented. Big, huge dents in the door.
Gerard has once again succeeded in stopping crime in its tracks. And the internet can't get enough of his videos.
YouTube, one of the videos went viral and got over 6 million views in a couple of weeks. Some of the comments are a little disturbing, like, oh, this is staged. Well, it's not staged. And if you knew what was going through my mind at the time that I'm confronting these people, it's very scary. It's just, very, very frightening.
And whether or not they agree with his tactics, Gerard's neighbors are grateful for his eye-opening gotcha videos.
I showed the resident manager, I was like, look at this, there's another one, here's another one. The resident manager had said, gosh, I can't believe this is starting to happen. And I was like, I don't think it's just starting to happen. I think that it's always been happening.
And despite the inherent danger it puts him in, Gerard says he will keep fighting the criminals and filming them.
Police have told me when they've come out, we can't tell you what to do, we can't tell you what not to do, but the camera's gonna be your ally, or it's going to be your downfall.
Put down! Put down!
December 11th, 2006. Winter had settled over northern Italy. In the small town of Erba, located in the province of Como, in the Lombardy region, the day was drawing to a close like countless others before it. The streets were quiet. Families were returning home. Lights glowed behind apartment windows as residents prepared dinner, watched television, or settled into routines that marked the end of an ordinary day. Nothing about that evening suggested that Erba was only moments away from becoming the center of one of the most infamous criminal cases in modern Italian history. At first, there was only smoke. Residents in an apartment building on Via Armando Diaz began noticing something unusual, a smell, then a haze, then the unmistakable signs of a fire. In apartment buildings, fires create a unique kind of panic. Unlike dangers that remain hidden behind closed doors, smoke travels. It seeps beneath thresholds. It fills hallways. It turns familiar spaces into places of uncertainty. People emerged from their apartments, confused and alarmed, trying to understand what was happening. Somewhere inside the building, flames had begun to spread. As concern turned into fear, neighbors moved toward the source. Some attempted to help. Others called emergency services. No one yet understood that the fire was not the beginning of the tragedy. It was merely the final act. When rescuers and residents entered the affected areas, they encountered a scene that will remain etched in memory for years. In the corridor, a man lay gravely injured. He was still alive, but only barely. Blood surrounded him. The injuries to his neck were catastrophic. To anyone looking at him, survival seemed impossible. Yet, somehow, he was breathing. Somehow, he remained alive. That man was Mario Frigerio. At that moment, nobody knew that his survival would later become one of the most important elements in the entire investigation. Beyond him, deeper inside the building, the situation became even more horrifying. Firefighters entered the apartment where the smoke appeared to be originating. What they found was not the aftermath of an accidental blaze. Inside were victims. The first body discovered belonged to 30-year-old Raffaella Castagna. The fire had already caused significant damage, but investigators would later determine that the flames had not been responsible for her death. She had been attacked before the fire began. As emergency personnel continued searching, additional victims were located. Raffaella's mother, Paola Galli, was found dead. Nearby was Raffaella's young son, Yusef Marzouk, a child only a little over 2 years old. Another victim, Valeria Cherubini, was discovered in the building after apparently becoming caught up in the violence. By the end of the night, 4 people were dead. One person remained alive by what many would later describe as an extraordinary stroke of fate. For investigators arriving at the scene, the questions were immediate and overwhelming. What had happened inside this apartment building? Who could have carried out such an attack? And perhaps most disturbing of all, why? Initial examinations quickly revealed that this was not a simple homicide. It was not a burglary gone wrong. It was not a spontaneous act of violence. The victims had been attacked with extreme brutality. Investigators would later conclude that knives and blunt objects had been used. The violence was deliberate. The violence was personal. And after the killings, a fire had been intentionally set. The implication was chilling. Someone had not only committed multiple murders, but had allegedly attempted to destroy evidence. Afterward, the fire appeared to serve a purpose. It transformed the crime scene. It complicated forensic analysis. It created confusion. whether intended to conceal identities, eliminate traces of evidence, or mislead investigators. The flames ensured that the case would begin under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. News of the massacre spread rapidly throughout Italy. As details emerged, public shock intensified. One detail in particular captured national attention. Among the victims was a 2-year-old child. Even in a country accustomed to high-profile criminal cases, the death of young Youssef Marzouk struck a nerve. Newspapers reported the story extensively. Television programs discussed it nightly. For many Italians, the murder of a child elevated the case from a horrific crime to a national trauma. The town of Erba suddenly found itself under intense scrutiny. Journalists arrived. Cameras appeared. Questions multiplied. Residents struggled to reconcile the quiet community they knew with the unimaginable violence that had occurred within it. Yet, while the deaths dominated headlines, another aspect of the case was quietly becoming just as important. Mario Frigerio was still alive. Medical personnel worked to save him. His injuries were severe. A deep wound to his neck should, under ordinary circumstances, have been fatal. Investigators later learned that Frigerio possessed a rare congenital abnormality involving his carotid artery. This unusual anatomical condition prevented the attack from causing the level of blood loss that would normally result from such a wound. In simple terms, he survived because his body was different. It was an extraordinary twist of fate. Had his anatomy been typical, there likely would have been no surviving witness at all. At the time, however, nobody could know what information Frigerio might eventually provide. The immediate focus remained on identifying those responsible. In the days that followed, investigators faced an immense challenge. The brutality of the crime suggested deep anger or personal resentment. The fire complicated evidence collection. Multiple victims meant multiple timelines and multiple potential motives. The presence of a surviving witness offered hope, but his condition was critical. Every possibility had to be considered. Every relationship had to be examined. Every lead had to be pursued. The investigation would soon move through several phases, each bringing new theories and new questions. At first, suspicion fell in one direction. Then it shifted dramatically elsewhere. Eventually, attention would focus on two individuals who lived remarkably close to the victims. The case against them would appear compelling to many observers. Yet it would also become the source of fierce controversy that continues nearly 2 decades later. Because what happened in Erba was not merely a story about violence. It became a story about evidence, about memory, about confessions, about whether a case can ever truly be considered closed when doubts continue to survive. Some people would come to believe that investigators solved the mystery. Others would spend years arguing that critical questions remained unanswered. Courtrooms would revisit the case. Appeals would be filed. Legal debates would continue long after the initial convictions. And through it all, the memory of 4 victims remained at the center of the tragedy. On that cold December night, 4 lives were taken: a mother, a grandmother, a neighbor, and a little boy who had barely begun his life. One man survived when survival should have been impossible. A fire consumed part of the crime scene. A town lost its sense of security. And Italy became captivated by a case that would evolve from a shocking mass murder into one of the most controversial criminal investigations in the country's modern history. This is the story of the Erba Massacre, a case defined not only by the horror of what happened on December 11th, 2006, but by the questions that continue to echo long after the flames were extinguished. Before the violence, before the investigations, before the endless legal debates that would divide public opinion for years, there was simply a residential building in the town of Erba. It stood on Via Armando Diaz, surrounded by the rhythms of ordinary life. Families lived side by side. Neighbors crossed paths in hallways and stairwells. Children grew up within its walls. Elderly residents spent their days following familiar routines. It was not the kind of place anyone would expect to become associated with one of the most notorious Criminal cases in modern Italian history. To understand the tragedy that unfolded on December 11, 2006, it is necessary to look beyond the crime scene itself and understand the people whose lives were forever changed. At the center of the story was 30-year-old Raffaella Castagna. To the outside world, she was a young mother living in Erba and raising her son. Like many people, her life was shaped by everyday responsibilities, family relationships, and the small concerns that accompany ordinary existence. The details that would later dominate newspaper headlines did not define her life before the crime. Long before investigators and journalists learned her name, she was simply a daughter, a mother, and a resident of the apartment building where the massacre would occur. Living with or frequently present in the apartment was her mother, Paola Galli. At 57 years old, Paola represented another generation of the same family. The bond between mothers and daughters often becomes difficult to fully appreciate until tragedy strikes. Families share routines that outsiders rarely notice. Meals, conversations, worries, celebrations, and countless ordinary moments create connections that appear simple from the outside but form the foundation of daily life. On the evening of December 11th, Paola happened to be inside the apartment with her daughter and grandson. It was a circumstance that would place her directly in the path of unimaginable violence. The youngest victim was little Youssef Marzouk. At just over 2 years old, he was barely beginning to discover the world around him. Children of that age live in a universe defined by trust. Their lives revolve around parents, grandparents, toys, familiar rooms, and routines they cannot yet fully understand. They depend entirely on the adults around them for safety and protection. When news emerged that a child so young had been among the victims, public reaction throughout Italy was immediate and emotional. Even in cases involving multiple murders, the death of a toddler carries a unique weight. Many people who followed the case later admitted that this detail affected them more than any other. It transformed the story from a terrible crime into something that felt almost impossible to comprehend. Another victim, Valeria Cherubini, was not a member of the Castagna family. She was a neighbor. According to the reconstruction, later accepted by investigators, she became involved during the events of that evening after apparently encountering something unusual. Unlike the other victims, she had not begun the evening inside the apartment where the primary attack occurred, yet she would ultimately become one of the 4 people who lost their lives. Her death added another layer of complexity to the investigation because it suggested that the violence had extended beyond a single household. It indicated that events had unfolded not only inside an apartment, but also within the shared spaces of the building itself. Then there was Mario Frigerio, Valeria's husband, while the other victims would become names and memorials and court documents. Mario occupied a different role in the story. He survived. His survival would eventually make him one of the most important figures in the investigation. Yet before becoming a key witness, he was simply a husband whose life changed forever in a matter of moments. The attack left him gravely wounded. The fact that he survived it all was extraordinary. Later, investigators learned that a rare congenital abnormality involving his carotid artery had prevented the neck wound from proving fatal. The significance of this fact cannot be overstated. Without Mario Frigerio's survival, the investigation would have unfolded very differently. The town itself also deserves attention. Erba was not a place known internationally before the massacre. Located in the Lombardy region of northern Italy, it was a community where many residents knew one another or at least recognized familiar faces. Like countless towns across Europe, daily life revolved around routines, work, family, and neighborhood relationships. Such communities often possess a sense of stability. People may disagree with one another, but there exists an expectation that disputes will remain within the boundaries of ordinary social conflict. The events of December 11th shattered that expectation. One reason the case attracted such intense attention was the possibility that the roots of crime lay not in organized criminal activity or unknown outsiders, but in something far more familiar, a conflict between neighbors. as investigators gradually reconstructed the relationships within the building. Attention focused increasingly on two residents, Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano. They lived in the same building as the Castagna family. According to information gathered during the investigation, tensions had existed between the households for an extended period. On the surface, the disagreements appeared mundane. There were complaints about noise. There were disputes involving common areas. There were arguments related to everyday coexistence inside a shared residential environment. Such conflicts are hardly unusual. Across the world, neighbors argue about noise levels, parking spaces, maintenance issues, pets, property boundaries, and countless other matters. Most disagreements eventually fade. Some remain unresolved but never progress beyond resentment. What made the Erba case so disturbing was the allegation that years of hostility may have gradually evolved into something much darker. Reports indicated that Rafaela Castagna had, on multiple occasions, contacted authorities regarding behavior she considered problematic. These reports allegedly increased tensions between the families. While disagreements among neighbors are common, repeated complaints can create lasting resentment. Every interaction becomes colored by previous conflicts. Small disputes begin to represent larger grievances. Trust disappears. Communication deteriorates. Over time, individuals may begin viewing one another not as neighbors, but as adversaries. Investigators would later examine this deteriorating relationship carefully because it appeared to offer a possible motive. It is important to remember, however, that before the massacre, these tensions existed largely within the private world of the apartment building. They were not the subject of national discussion. They did not appear on television. They were simply part of the social fabric of daily life in a shared residential space. Looking back after the crime, many observers found themselves asking a difficult question: how does an ordinary dispute become something more? The answer is rarely simple. Human relationships are complicated. Resentments can develop gradually. Small incidents accumulate over months and years. What appears insignificant to outsiders may feel deeply personal to those involved. Yet it is equally important to recognize that most neighborhood conflicts never result in violence. The vast majority remain exactly what they are: disagreements. This reality would later become one of the reasons why the Erba massacre fascinated and disturbed so many people. The alleged motive, according to prosecutors, was not rooted in financial gain, organized crime, or some elaborate conspiracy. Instead, it appeared connected to ordinary human conflict carried to an unimaginable extreme. That possibility forced many observers to confront an uncomfortable idea. If investigators were correct, the tragedy had not emerged from a hidden criminal world. It had emerged from a familiar environment of daily life. The victims and the individuals later accused of killing them had lived in close proximity. They occupied the same building. They moved through the same hallways. They shared the same residential spaces. Their lives intersected regularly. This proximity made the allegations feel uniquely unsettling. Crimes committed by strangers are frightening because they seem random. Crimes allegedly committed by neighbors carry a different kind of horror because they challenge assumptions about familiarity and trust. As the future investigation would reveal, these relationships became central to understanding the case. Prosecutors would ultimately argue that long-standing hostility provided the motive for the massacre. Defense attorneys would challenge aspects of the evidence used to support that conclusion. Courts would spend years examining witness statements, physical evidence, confessions, and competing interpretations of what occurred. But before any of those debates began, there were only people living their lives in Erba. A young mother, her small child, her mother, a neighboring couple, another neighbor, and her husband. Families occupying apartments in the same building, connected by proximity and daily routine. None of them could have known that their names would soon become known throughout Italy. None of them could have imagined that a single winter evening would transform their building into a crime scene, their relationships into evidence. and their lives into the subject of one of the most controversial criminal cases in the country's history. By the time the night of December 11th arrived, the tensions that had existed within the building were largely invisible to the outside world. Yet investigators would later look back at those years of disputes and ask whether the warning signs had been there all along, whether resentment had been quietly growing behind closed doors, whether ordinary conflicts had gradually become something more dangerous, and whether anyone could have anticipated the violence that was about to unfold. The answers to those questions would become the focus of an investigation that captivated Italy. But before investigators could identify suspects, analyze evidence, or evaluate motives, they first had to understand what happened inside the building that winter night. Because somewhere between 8:00 and 8:30 p.m. on December 11th, 2006, the lives of everyone connected to Via Armando Diaz changed forever, and the quiet town of Erba entered a chapter of its history that would never be forgotten. December 11, 2006, began like any other winter day in Erba. There was no warning, no sign visible from the outside that the quiet routines unfolding inside the apartment building on. Via Armando Diaz were moving toward catastrophe. As darkness settled over the town and residents retreated indoors from the December cold, life continued according to familiar patterns. Families prepared for the evening. Televisions flickered behind curtains. Conversations drifted through apartment walls. In many ways, it was an ordinary night. Yet sometime between approximately 8:00 p.m. and 8:30 p.m., according to the reconstruction later accepted by investigators, a sequence of events began that would leave 4 people dead, one man fighting for his life, and an entire nation searching for answers. Inside the apartment of Rafaela Castagna were 3 people: Rafaela herself, her mother, Paula Gali, and Rafaela's young son, Yusef Marzouk, who was only a little over 2 years old. What exactly happened during those first moments remains known only through the evidence later, recovered from the scene, and the conclusions drawn by investigators. There were no cameras recording the events, no independent eyewitnesses standing inside the apartment. The story had to be reconstructed piece by piece from the aftermath. Investigators would eventually conclude that the violence began suddenly and with extraordinary brutality. According to their reconstruction, Paula Gali was among the first victims attacked. The assault was severe. She suffered multiple blows to the head delivered with a blunt object. The nature of the injury suggested overwhelming force. Forensic investigators later viewed this as evidence that the attack was intended to incapacitate immediately, leaving little opportunity for resistance or escape. Whether there were words exchanged beforehand remains unknown. Whether Paula understood what was happening in those first seconds can never be answered. What is known is that the violence escalated rapidly. Rafaela Castagna was also attacked. Investigators later determined that both knives and blunt force violence had been used during the assault. The brutality evident at the crime scene deeply affected those who examined it. This was not a crime characterized by hesitation. The injuries suggested determination, intensity, and a willingness to continue the attack until the victims could no longer defend themselves. For the investigators attempting to understand motive, this level of violence would later become an important consideration. Crimes committed during spontaneous confrontations often display one pattern. Crimes involving sustained attacks can suggest something very different. As the attack unfolded, another victim became trapped within the nightmare. Little Yusef Marzouk was only a toddler. The precise circumstances under which he encountered the violence remain unclear. Investigators believe that at some point during the attack, the child either appeared or was discovered inside the apartment. Whatever happened in those moments, the outcome horrified Italy when details became public. Yusef was killed. It is difficult to overstate the emotional impact this had on public opinion. Adults can become involved in disputes. Adults can find themselves caught in dangerous situations. But a 2-year-old child represents innocence in its purest form. Newspapers throughout Italy reported extensively on the death of the toddler. television coverage repeatedly returned to the same painful question. How could a child become one of the victims of such extreme violence? Even among seasoned investigators and journalists accustomed to reporting on homicide cases, the death of Youssef stood out as particularly heartbreaking. Yet the violence was not confined to the apartment itself. According to the reconstruction, later presented by investigators, events soon expanded beyond the walls of the Castagna residence. At some point during the unfolding attack, another resident of the building became involved. Valeria Cherubini was a neighbor. Investigators believe that she may have heard unusual noises, become aware that something was wrong, or perhaps encountered part of the unfolding situation. The exact trigger remains uncertain, but authorities later concluded that she somehow came into contact with the events occurring that night. If that reconstruction was correct, her involvement may have been entirely accidental. She was not initially inside the apartment where the primary attack occurred, yet she found herself directly in the path of the violence. According to investigators, Valeria was attacked in the common areas of the building, including the hallway or stairwell. Evidence suggested that she attempted to flee. There are moments in criminal investigations that reveal the human instinct for survival with painful clarity. The possibility that Valeria realized danger was present and tried to escape is one such moment. Running from violence requires a split-second recognition that something terrible is happening. It means understanding that ordinary reality has suddenly been replaced by immediate danger. Investigators believed she was unable to get away. She suffered multiple injuries and ultimately became the fourth fatal victim of the massacre. The attack might have ended there, for people were already dead or dying. Yet another resident would unexpectedly enter the unfolding tragedy. Mario Frigerio, Valeria's husband, became aware that something unusual was happening. According to later accounts, he heard disturbances and opened his door to investigate. It was a decision many people might have made under similar circumstances. In apartment buildings, unusual sounds often prompt concern. Residents look into hallways. They check on neighbors. They try to determine whether someone needs help. What Mario encountered instead was life-changing violence. He was attacked almost immediately. The injuries he sustained were devastating. Among them was a deep wound to his neck. The attack was so severe that investigators later believed the perpetrator or perpetrators assumed he was dead. Under ordinary circumstances, they likely would have been correct. A wound of that nature typically results in catastrophic blood loss. Yet fate intervened through a circumstance no one could have predicted. Mario Frigerio possessed a rare congenital abnormality involving his carotid artery. This unusual anatomical condition altered the outcome of the attack. Although gravely injured, he did not die. The injury that should have killed him failed to sever the critical structures in precisely the way it normally would. As a result, he remained alive. It was an extraordinary medical coincidence. Later, many observers would describe his survival as miraculous. At the time, however, there was nothing miraculous about the scene itself. Mario lay critically wounded, bleeding heavily and hovering between life and death. With the victims attacked, investigators believe one final stage remained. Whoever committed the violence appeared determined not only to leave the scene, but also to alter it. According to the subsequent investigation, a fire was intentionally set inside the apartment. Authorities believed that a flammable substance had been used to help ignite the blaze. The suspected purpose of the fire became one of the central elements of the case. Investigators proposed several possible objectives. The fire could have been intended to destroy forensic evidence. It could have been intended to damage bodies and complicate the determination of what happened. It could have been designed to mislead investigators into treating the scene differently. Whatever the exact intention, the result was immediate. Flames began spreading through the apartment. Smoke poured into the building's common areas. What had already been a murder scene was transformed into a fire emergency. Residents who knew nothing about the attacks suddenly found themselves confronting smoke and danger. Panic spread through the building. Some occupants evacuated. Others attempted to determine where the fire had started. Calls were placed to emergency services. The atmosphere quickly shifted from confusion to alarm. Every minute that passed increased the risk to those still inside. For emergency responders, the initial dispatch was a fire call. Yet as firefighters and rescuers arrived, it became clear that they were entering something far more complex. The smoke was visible. The urgency was obvious. Teams moved quickly into building, focusing first on rescue and containment. Then came the discoveries. In the corridor, responders found Mario Frigerio. Despite his terrible injuries, he was still alive. The sight was shocking. Immediate medical attention became critical. At the same time, firefighters pushed deeper into the affected areas. Inside the apartment, they encountered the victims. Rafaela Castagna was discovered amid the destruction caused by the fire. Further searches located Palagali and young Youssef. Elsewhere in the building, Valeria Cherubini was found. As emergency personnel worked through the scene, a horrifying picture gradually emerged. This was not an accidental fire. This was not a single homicide. It was a mass killing. The realization unfolded piece by piece as victims were located and injuries assessed. Many years later, accounts from individuals familiar with the investigation would continue to emphasize the shocking nature of the crime scene. The combination of multiple homicide victims, extreme violence, and fire damage created an environment unlike anything many responders had previously encountered. For investigators arriving afterward, the challenge was immense. They faced a damage scene. They faced multiple victims located in different areas. They faced evidence that had potentially been altered by fire. They faced the possibility of more than one motive, more than one timeline, and more than one explanation. Yet amidst the devastation, one fact stood out. Someone had survived. Mario Frigerio was alive. His condition was critical, but he remained alive. At that moment, nobody knew what information he might eventually provide. Nobody knew whether he had seen his attacker, heard a voice, or recognized anything useful. Those answers would come later. For now, investigators focused on preserving evidence and understanding the basic sequence of events. Outside the building, the town of Erbil was beginning to learn that something terrible had happened. News traveled quickly. Residents exchanged rumors. Emergency vehicles attracted attention. As details slowly emerged, shock spread to the community. 4 people were dead. One of them was a child. Another remained in critical condition. A residential building had become the site of one of the most violent crimes the town had ever experienced. The ordinary routines of that winter evening had vanished forever. By the time the flames were extinguished, the massacre was over, but the mystery was only beginning. Investigators still did not know who was responsible. They did not know why the victims had been targeted. They did not know whether the crime had been committed by one person or more than one. What they did know was that the answers would not be easy to find. The violence had been extreme. The scene had been damaged by fire. The victims could no longer speak for themselves. And somewhere beyond the apartment building, the person or persons responsible had disappeared into the night. The search for the truth would soon begin, leading investigators through a maze of theories, evidence, witness statements, and controversies that would continue long after the crime itself had ended. In the immediate aftermath of the massacre, investigators faced a scene that was as challenging as it was horrifying. 4 people were dead. A fire had damaged critical areas of the crime scene. One man remained alive but gravely injured. The violence itself appeared deliberate and extreme. Yet despite the brutality of the attack, authorities initially had very little certainty about who was responsible. Like many major investigations, the search for answers began not with conclusions but with possibilities. Every victim had relationships. Every relationship created potential leads. Every lead had to be examined. The challenge for investigators was determining which theories were supported by evidence and which would ultimately lead nowhere. During the earliest phase of the investigation, attention focused on a figure who appeared at least initially, to fit one possible explanation. That individual was Azuz Marzouk, the husband of Rafaela Castagna and the father of young Youssef. Investigators knew that Marzouk had a criminal history involving drug-related offenses. They also knew that violent crimes can sometimes emerge from disputes connected to criminal networks, personal vendettas, or retaliation. Given the extraordinary brutality of the massacre, authorities could not ignore the possibility that the killings were linked to something beyond the apartment building itself. The theory was straightforward. If Marzouk had connections to individuals involved in criminal activity, perhaps the attack represented a form of revenge or retaliation directed at him through his family. Such scenarios were not unheard of in major criminal investigations. The victims inside the apartment could have been targeted not because of who they were, but because of their connection to someone else. For a time, investigators explored this possibility seriously. The theory attracted attention because it appeared capable of explaining the severity of the violence. However, theories require evidence. As investigators began examining travel records, interviewing witnesses, and reconstructing timelines, a critical fact emerged. At the time of the massacre, Azuz Marzouk was not in Erba. Evidence indicated that he was in Tunisia. Authorities reviewed documentation. Travel records were checked. Witnesses were consulted. The more investigators examined his whereabouts, the stronger his alibi became. Eventually, the conclusion became unavoidable. Whatever had happened on Via Armando Diaz, Azuz Marzouk could not have physically carried it out. The first major theory collapsed. For investigators, this development created both relief and frustration. Relief because an innocent person should not remain under suspicion. Frustration because the elimination of one theory meant returning to the beginning. The case remained unsolved. The questions remained unanswered. The victims remained without justice. Investigators once again examined the relationships surrounding the victims, searching for another direction. It was during this phase that attention increasingly shifted toward individuals who lived much closer to the victims than anyone had initially considered. The names Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano began appearing more frequently in investigative discussions. Unlike the earlier theory involving distant criminal connections, this new line of inquiry focused on something far more local. Rosa and Olindo lived in the same building. They were neighbors of the Castagna family. More importantly, investigators learned that tensions had existed between the households for years. According to information gathered from residents and other sources, disputes had repeatedly occurred between the families. Complaints had been made. Arguments had taken place. Resentment appeared to have accumulated over time. To outside observers, the idea was unsettling. People often imagine horrific crimes being committed by strangers. Yet investigators were increasingly examining the possibility that the roots of the massacre lay within the apartment building itself. The focus on Rosa and Olindo intensified as forensic evidence began producing results. Among the most significant discoveries was a finding involving blood evidence. During the investigation, authorities examined Olindo Romano's vehicle. According to investigators, traces of blood belonging to victim Valeria Cherubini were found inside the car. This discovery immediately attracted attention. Blood evidence carries enormous weight in criminal investigations because it can create a direct connection between victims and suspects. For prosecutors, the significance appeared obvious. If blood from one of the victims was present in the vehicle, investigators needed to determine how it got there. The discovery quickly became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. It would later be presented repeatedly during legal proceedings and public discussions. Yet it was not the only factor drawing attention toward the couple. Investigators also reported finding injuries on Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano. According to authorities, these injuries were consistent with the possibility that they had been involved in a violent struggle. The presence of such injuries did not automatically prove guilt. However, in combination with the existing tensions between the families and the blood evidence discovered in the vehicle, Investigators believed the picture was becoming increasingly significant. Still, physical evidence alone rarely tells an entire story. Investigators needed testimony. They needed accounts from witnesses. They needed someone who could help explain what had happened during those critical minutes on December 11th, and that brought them back to the only person who had survived the attack. Mario Frugierio's survival had already been described as extraordinary, yet during the early stages of the investigation, his condition limited his ability to assist authorities. He had suffered devastating injuries. Recovery required time. Medical treatment remained the immediate priority. Investigators could not simply demand answers from a man who was fighting to stay alive. As days passed and his condition gradually improved, however, the possibility emerged that he might be able to provide information unavailable from any other source. The importance of his testimony was impossible to ignore, for victims were dead. Only one person had survived an encounter with the attacker. If Mario remembered anything, it could alter the course of the entire investigation. Eventually, investigators obtained a statement from him. According to the account later presented during the case, Mario stated that he recognized the individual who attacked him. Specifically, he identified Olindo Romano. The significance of this claim cannot be overstated. Investigators now possess not only physical evidence and evidence of long-standing disputes, but also testimony from the sole survivor of the massacre. For prosecutors, this represented a major breakthrough. A surviving witness identifying a suspect can become one of the most powerful forms of evidence presented in court. Mario's statement immediately strengthened the case investigators believed they were building. Yet it also created future controversy. Defense attorneys would later challenge the reliability of the identification. They argued that Mario had suffered severe trauma. He had experienced catastrophic injuries. He had undergone extensive medical treatment. Under such circumstances, they claimed memory could be affected. The defense would eventually question whether his recollection was entirely reliable. But at the time investigators received the statement, they viewed it as a crucial development. The investigation then entered an even more dramatic phase. Authorities arrested Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano. What happened next would become one of the most debated aspects of the entire case. During questioning, Olindo Romano confessed. According to investigators, he admitted involvement in the massacre and provided details about the crime. Not long afterward, Rosa Bazzi also confessed. For law enforcement officials, the confessions appear to confirm the direction of the investigation. Authorities believe they now had a coherent explanation. There was an apparent motive rooted in years of hostility. There was blood evidence. There was a surviving witness. And now there were confessions. Prosecutors would later argue that these admissions contained details consistent with the crime. Scene itself, they maintained that certain aspects of the confessions demonstrated knowledge that only those involved could possess. To investigators, the case seemed increasingly solid, yet the story did not end there. In fact, the controversy that would surround the Erba massacre for nearly 2 decades truly began at this point. After initially confessing, both suspects changed their positions. Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano withdrew their confessions and declared themselves innocent. The reversal transformed the investigation into something much more complicated. Suddenly, a new question emerged. Why had they confessed if they were innocent? The defense provided an answer. According to their legal team, the confessions had been the product of psychological pressure during questioning. They argued that the admissions could not be trusted and should not be considered reliable, indicators of guilt. Prosecutors strongly disagreed. They maintained that the confessions were genuine and contained important details consistent with the evidence. What had initially seemed like a straightforward conclusion now became the center of a fierce legal and public debate. The disagreement extended beyond the courtroom. Journalists began examining the evidence. Commentators discussed the confessions on television programs. Members of the public formed competing opinions. Some believed the investigation had uncovered the truth. Others questioned whether the case was truly as clear as authorities claimed. The controversy grew because the evidence appeared compelling to some observers while raising questions for others. On one side stood the combination of blood evidence, witness identification, injuries, and confessions. On the other stood concerns about the reliability of testimony, the circumstances of the confessions, and the interpretation of forensic findings. As investigators completed their work and prosecutors prepared for trial, the Erba massacre had already evolved into more than a homicide investigation. It had become a national debate. Every new development attracted attention. Every piece of evidence was scrutinized. Every statement generated discussion. The search for those responsible had led authorities from an initial theory involving organized crime to a case centered on two neighbors accused of carrying out one of the most shocking crimes in modern Italian history. Yet despite the arrests and confessions, the most consequential phase was still ahead. The evidence would soon be tested in court. Prosecutors would attempt to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. Defense attorneys would challenge the conclusions reached by investigators. Judges would be asked to determine which interpretation of the evidence was correct, and the outcome of those proceedings would shape not only the future of Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano, but also the legacy of a case that would continue dividing public opinion long after the verdicts were delivered. By the time the Erba massacre investigation reached the courtroom, the case had already become one of the most closely followed criminal proceedings in Italy. The brutality of the killings, the death of a 2-year-old child, the survival of Mario Frigerio, the confessions, the retractions, and the growing public debate had transformed what began as a local tragedy into a national story. Yet despite months of investigation, one fundamental question remained at the center of the proceedings. Had prosecutors truly identified the people responsible for the murders of Raffaella Castagna, Paola Galli, Youssef Marzouk, and Valeria Cherubini? The answer would now depend on the courts. As preparations for trial advanced, both sides assembled their arguments. Prosecutors believed they had constructed a compelling case based on multiple pieces of evidence that pointed toward the same conclusion. Defense attorneys, however, argued that important weaknesses existed within that evidence and that significant doubts remained unresolved. The courtroom would become the place where those competing narratives collided. For prosecutors, the foundation of the case rested on what they described as a convergence of several independent elements. Individually, each piece of evidence was important. Together, they argued, the evidence formed a coherent picture of guilt. One of the first elements presented was motive. Prosecutors pointed to the long-standing tensions that had existed between the Castagna family and their neighbors, Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano. According to the prosecution's interpretation, years of disputes had created an environment of hostility. Complaints regarding noise, disagreements involving shared living spaces, and repeated conflicts had gradually poisoned relations between the households. Prosecutors argued that these tensions were not isolated incidents, but part of a pattern that had continued for years. In their view, the resentment that developed through these disputes ultimately provided a motive for violence. The prosecution did not portray the massacre as a spontaneous act. Instead, they suggested it represented the culmination of a long deterioration in the relationship between neighbors who had come to view each other with hostility. Yet motive alone could never secure a conviction in a case of this magnitude. Prosecutors therefore turned to the physical evidence recovered during the investigation. Among the most significant findings was the blood evidence discovered inside Olindo Romano's vehicle. Investigators had identified traces of blood belonging to victim Valeria Cherubini. Throughout the proceedings, prosecutors emphasized the importance of this discovery. They argued that the presence of a victim's blood inside the vehicle established a powerful connection between the crime and the accused. For the prosecution, this was not an abstract forensic detail. It was a tangible piece of evidence that they believed supported the broader case they had. Assembled, another crucial element involved Mario Frigerio, the sole survivor of the massacre. His testimony occupied a central role throughout the proceedings. Prosecutors reminded the court that Mario had survived injuries that should ordinarily have been fatal. After recovering sufficiently to provide information, he stated that he recognized Olindo Romano as the individual who attacked him. Prosecutors viewed this identification as extraordinarily important. In many homicide investigations, there are no surviving witnesses. Here, they argued, the court had the testimony of a man who had come face-to-face with his attacker and later identified him. The prosecution maintained that Mario's account reinforced conclusions already suggested by other evidence. Yet perhaps the most dramatic aspect of the prosecution's case involved the confessions. During the investigation, both Olindo Romano and Rosa Bazzi had confessed to involvement in the massacre. Prosecutors argued that these admissions contained details consistent with the known facts of the crime. They emphasized that the confessions were not vague acknowledgments of guilt, but accounts that allegedly matched important aspects of the evidence. According to the prosecution, certain details included in the statements demonstrated knowledge available only to individuals directly involved in the murders. For prosecutors, the confessions represented a powerful confirmation of the investigative conclusions already being reached. When combined with motive, blood evidence, and witness testimony, they believed the admissions strengthened an already substantial case. Defense attorneys approached the proceedings from a very different perspective. Their objective was not necessarily to prove an alternative explanation for every aspect of the case. Rather, it was to challenge the certainty of the prosecution's conclusions and highlight areas where doubt remained possible. One of the defense's most significant arguments involved forensic evidence. They pointed out that there was no direct DNA evidence conclusively placing Rosa Bazzi or Olindo Romano at the crime scene itself. In a case involving multiple victims, extreme violence, and close physical contact, the defense argued that the absence of such evidence deserved careful consideration. They suggested that the forensic picture presented by prosecutors was not as complete or straightforward as it appeared. The defense also challenged the reliability of Mario Frigirio's identification. They acknowledged the importance of his survival, but argued that surviving a traumatic attack does not automatically guarantee perfect memory. Mario had suffered severe injuries. He had undergone extensive medical treatment. He had experienced extraordinary physical and psychological trauma. Defense attorneys argued that these circumstances could potentially influence memory and recollection. While prosecutors viewed his testimony as a cornerstone of the case, the defense urged the court to consider the possibility that his identification might not be entirely reliable. The confessions generated perhaps the most intense debate of all. Defense attorneys argued that the admissions should not be accepted at face value because both defendants later withdrew them. According to the defense, the confessions resulted from psychological pressure during questioning. They maintained that the circumstances surrounding the interrogations raised concerns regarding the reliability of the statements. If the confessions were not voluntary and accurate reflections of reality, then one of the prosecution's strongest arguments became significantly less persuasive. Prosecutors rejected this interpretation. They insisted that the confessions were genuine and contained details consistent with the evidence. Thus, one of the central battles of the trial involved determining how much weight should be given to statements that had first been offered and later retracted. As testimony continued and evidence was presented, the court was asked to evaluate not merely individual facts, but the overall picture created by those facts. Prosecutors argued that the evidence converged toward a single conclusion. The defense argued that the same evidence left room for uncertainty. The judges faced a difficult task of deciding which interpretation was more convincing. In 2008, the court delivered its verdict. Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano were found guilty of murder. The court concluded that they were responsible for the killings that had shocked Italy nearly 2 years earlier. Both defendants received life sentences. In addition to life imprisonment, each was sentenced to 3 years of daytime solitary confinement. a supplementary punishment permitted under Italian law at the time. For prosecutors and for those who believed the investigation had successfully identified the perpetrators, the verdict represented justice for the victims. The court had accepted the prosecution's interpretation of the evidence and concluded that the case had been proven. Yet the legal process was not over. Cases of this magnitude rarely end with a single verdict. Appeals followed. The defense continued challenging aspects of the evidence and the conclusions reached during the original proceedings. Once again, courts were asked to review the case and determine whether errors had occurred or whether the verdict should stand. In 2010, the appellate court reviewed the case. After examining the arguments presented, the court upheld the convictions. The verdict remained unchanged. The life sentences imposed upon Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano continued to stand. For supporters of the prosecution's case, the appellate decision reinforced confidence in the original judgment. For critics, however, questions persisted. The existence of appeals demonstrated that the controversy surrounding the case had not disappeared. It had merely entered a new phase. The final major chapter of the judicial process arrived in 2011. The case reached the Court of Cassation, Italy's highest court for criminal matters. This represented the ultimate stage of review. The court examined the legal arguments and the decisions rendered by the lower courts. After considering the case, the Court of Cassation confirmed the convictions. With that decision, the verdicts became final. Legally speaking, the case appeared settled. Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano would remain convicted of the Erba massacre. Yet, while the judicial process had reached its conclusion, the public debate did not end. In some cases, a final ruling brings closure. The Erba massacre proved different. Even after the highest court confirmed the convictions, discussions continued among journalists, legal observers, and members of the public. Some viewed the verdict as a logical outcome of a case supported by multiple converging pieces of evidence. Others remained troubled by questions involving forensic findings, witness testimony, and the confessions. These disagreements ensured that the trial's conclusion would not mark the end of the story. Nevertheless, from the perspective of the courts, a decision had been reached. The murders of Raffaella Castagna, Paola Galli, Youssef Marzouk, and Valeria Cherubini had resulted in convictions. The surviving victim, Mario Frigerio, had lived long enough to play a significant role in the pursuit of justice. Investigators had spent years reconstructing the events of December 11, 2006. Prosecutors had presented their case. Defense attorneys had challenged it. Multiple courts had reviewed the evidence. And ultimately, the Italian judicial system concluded that Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano were responsible for one of the most shocking crimes in modern Italian history. Yet even as the verdict became final, the larger legacy of the Erba massacre was still taking shape. The legal proceedings had delivered an answer. Whether everyone accepted that answer was a very different question. That unresolved tension between judicial certainty and public debate would continue to define the case for years to come, ensuring that the story of Erba would remain alive long after courtroom doors had closed. The legal proceedings may have reached their conclusion, but the story of the Erba massacre did not end when the final verdict was delivered. In many criminal cases, a conviction creates a sense of closure. Courts examine the evidence. Judges render decisions. Appeals are exhausted, and the case gradually becomes part of history. Erba followed a different path. Even after multiple courts upheld the convictions of Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano, the massacre continued to generate debate, attract media attention, and provoke disagreement throughout Italy. The reason was not simply the brutality of the crime itself. It was a persistent tension between legal certainty and public doubt. For some, the case had been solved. For others, questions remained. That divide ensured that the events of December 11, 2006, would continue to echo far beyond the courtroom. The immediate aftermath of the massacre left deep scars on the community of Erba. For people had lost their lives in circumstances that shocked even experienced investigators. Residents of the town were forced to confront the reality that an act of extraordinary violence had occurred within an ordinary residential building. The sense of safety that often defines small communities had been shattered. The victims were not distant strangers appearing briefly in newspaper headlines. They were neighbors. They were people connected to a real place, a real community, and real lives. Every discussion about the case eventually returned to the human cost. Rafaela Castagna would never return home. Her mother, Paola Galli, would never see another day with her family. Valeria Cherubini would never again walk through the hallways of the building where she lived. Little Youssef Marzouk would never have the opportunity to grow up. The statistics of the case were easy to recite. 4 deaths, 1 survivor, 2 convictions. But behind those numbers stood individual lives permanently interrupted. As years passed, the legal debate increasingly became one of the defining features of the case. Supporters of the verdict argued that the courts had reached the correct conclusion. They pointed to what prosecutors had emphasized from the beginning, the existence of multiple pieces of evidence that appeared to converge on the same suspects. In their view, the case did not rely on a single witness or a single forensic finding. Instead, they argued that several independent elements pointed toward Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano. There were the long-standing conflicts with the Castagna family. There was the blood evidence recovered during the investigation. There was the testimony of Mario Frigerio, the sole survivor. There were the confessions that both defendants initially provided. To those who accepted the verdict, the strength of the case lay in this accumulation of evidence. No single piece stood entirely alone. Each element reinforced the others. From that perspective, the convictions represented the outcome of a careful judicial process that had been reviewed repeatedly by multiple courts. Yet another group continued to express reservations. These individuals did not necessarily agree on every aspect of the case, but they shared a common belief that certain questions remained unresolved. Critics of the verdict pointed to concerns surrounding forensic evidence. They questioned whether the available DNA evidence provided a complete picture. Others focused on the testimony of Mario Frigerio, arguing that the effects of trauma and medical treatment should continue to be examined carefully when evaluating memory. Still others concentrated on the confessions, suggesting that statements later withdrawn deserved close scrutiny. The persistence of these concerns ensured that public discussion never fully disappeared. Unlike many criminal cases that gradually fade from public consciousness, Erba remained a subject of documentaries, news reports, legal commentary, and public debate. Every few years, the controversy seemed to return. New articles appeared. Legal experts revisited old arguments. Journalists reviewed the evidence. The case became one of those rare criminal investigations that existed simultaneously in 2 different worlds. In the judicial world, the matter had been decided. In the court of public opinion, discussion continued. This continuing debate became particularly visible during the years 2023 through 2025. Nearly 2 decades had passed since the massacre, yet legal efforts on behalf of Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano did not cease. Their attorneys continued seeking opportunities to challenge the convictions and pursue a new review of the evidence. Requests for retrial were submitted, supported by arguments involving forensic analysis and perceived inconsistencies within the original case. The existence of these efforts demonstrated how unusual the Erba massacre had become. Most criminal cases eventually settle into historical certainty. Erba remained active. Questions that had first emerged during the original investigation continued to surface years later. Each new request for review attracted significant media attention because it reopened a conversation many believed had never truly ended. Yet despite these efforts, Italian courts repeatedly declined to reopen the case. The requests for retrial were rejected. The convictions remained intact. The life sentences imposed upon Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano continued to stand. From a legal perspective, the position of the courts remained consistent. The judgments reached through the original proceedings and subsequent appeals were upheld. This distinction between legal finality and public controversy became one of the defining Characteristics of the Erba massacre. Even as courts maintained their conclusions, public discussions continued to explore the same questions that had existed for years. The result was a case that occupied a unique place within modern Italian criminal history. The massacre also left a broader cultural impact. Certain crimes become symbols because they touch fears that extend beyond the immediate facts of the case. Erba was one of those crimes. Part of its lasting power came from the nature of the victims. The death of a 2-year-old child ensured that the case would never be viewed as merely another homicide investigation. The presence of child among the victims transformed the emotional dimension of the story. Another factor was the alleged relationship between victims and perpetrators. According to the prosecution's theory, the violence emerged from conflicts between neighbors living in the same building. Whether discussing the evidence, the verdict, or the controversy, observers repeatedly returned to this unsettling possibility. People expect danger from distant threats. They are less prepared for danger that originates next door. The idea that years of ordinary disputes could allegedly culminate in such violence disturbed many people because it challenged assumptions about everyday life. The use of fire added another layer to the case's notoriety. Investigators believed the blaze was set intentionally after the killings. This transformed the massacre from a multiple homicide into something even more complex. The fire was viewed as an attempt to conceal evidence and complicate the investigation. It created dramatic imagery that remained associated with the case for years afterward. The sight of smoke rising from the building on Via Armando Diaz became one of the defining images of the tragedy. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the case was the role played by Mario Frigerio. His survival remained one of the most extraordinary elements of the entire story. Had he died from his injuries, the investigation would have lost its only surviving witness. The trajectory of the case might have been entirely different. Instead, a rare congenital abnormality allowed him to survive an attack that should have killed him. His survival became a reminder of how fragile the line between life and death can be. A small anatomical difference altered not only his own fate, but potentially the direction of one of Italy's most famous criminal investigations. Looking back today, nearly 20 years after the massacre, it is easy to become absorbed by debates over evidence, court rulings, and legal arguments. Those discussions remain important. They have shaped how the case is understood and remembered. Yet focusing exclusively on those controversies risks obscuring the individuals whose lives were lost. At its core, the Erba massacre is not merely a story about criminal procedure or judicial decisions. It is a story about human beings. A mother, a grandmother, a neighbor, a child. Their absence is the one fact upon which everyone agrees. Regardless of where people stand on the legal controversies, the tragedy itself remains undeniable. The events of December 11, 2006, inflicted wounds that never fully healed. Families lost loved ones. A community lost its sense of security. Italy gained a criminal case that continues to provoke discussion long after the original headlines. Faded. The enduring fascination with Erba reflects something larger than the details of a single investigation. It reflects humanity's search for certainty in situations where certainty can feel elusive. Courts are asked to determine guilt or innocence. Evidence is collected, analyzed, and debated. Verdicts are rendered. Yet, public discussion often continues because people seek complete understanding. And complete understanding is not always possible. The Erba massacre occupies a difficult space between legal resolution and lasting public inquiry. It remains simultaneously a concluded case and a continuing conversation. In the end, perhaps the most important lesson of Erba lies not in the arguments that divided observers, but in the lives that were lost. The victims entered that winter evening expecting nothing extraordinary. They were at home. They were surrounded by familiar people and familiar surroundings. Like countless others, they believed they had another tomorrow waiting for them. Instead, their lives became part of tragedy that would be remembered across Italy for decades. The fire was extinguished. The trials ended. The appeals concluded. Yet the memory of December 11, 2006 remains. It survives in court records, news archives, and public debate. More importantly, it survives in the memory of those who continue to remember the people at the center of the story. And that is why the Erba massacre endures as one of the most haunting and controversial criminal cases in modern Italian history, not merely because of the violence that occurred, but because nearly 20 years later, it still forces people to confront difficult questions about justice, evidence, certainty, and the lasting consequences of a single winter night. Nearly 2 decades have passed since the night of December 11th, 2006, yet the Erba massacre continues to occupy a unique place in the history of Italian crime. Most criminal cases eventually settle into a stable narrative. Investigators identify suspects. Courts evaluate the evidence. Verdicts are delivered, and public attention gradually fades. The story of Erba followed a different trajectory. Instead of disappearing into the archives of criminal history, it remained alive, discussed not only because of the horror of the crime itself, but because of the questions that refused to disappear. In many ways, the Erba massacre became 2 stories at once. The first story is a tragedy that occurred inside the apartment building on Via Armando Diaz, where people lost their lives. Raffaella Castagna, Paola Galli, Valeria Cherubini, and little Youssef Marzouk never returned home. Mario Frigerio survived despite injuries that should have been fatal. That story is undisputed. The deaths occurred. The suffering was real. The consequences were permanent. The second story concerns a long debate that followed. It is a story about evidence, memory, forensic interpretation, and the difficult relationship between legal certainty and public skepticism. While the courts reached a final conclusion, discussion continued among journalists, legal commentators, and members of the public. Supporters of the convictions often point to what they see as the cumulative strength of the evidence. They note that prosecutors did not rely upon a single element. Instead, they presented multiple factors that appear to reinforce one another. There were the documented conflicts between neighbors. There was the blood evidence recovered during the investigation. There was the testimony provided by Mario Frigerio. There were the confessions initially offered by Rosa Bazzi and Olindo Romano. To those who accept the verdicts, the significance lies not in any one piece of evidence, but in the fact that several independent elements appear to point in the same direction. Yet critics of the convictions continue to focus on different aspects of the case. They argue that some forensic questions remain open to interpretation. They question the reliability of certain testimony, given the extraordinary trauma experienced by witnesses. They revisit the circumstances surrounding the confessions and ask whether psychological pressures may have played a role. They point to issues they believe deserve further examination even after years of judicial review. What makes Erba unusual is that these discussions have survived for so long. Criminal cases are often remembered because of their brutality. Erba is remembered because of both its brutality and its controversy. The legal proceedings ended years ago, but the debate continued. Every attempt to seek a retrial generated fresh headlines. Every court decision rejecting those requests reignited discussion. Each new article introduced the case to another generation that had not experienced the original. Events of 2006. The requests for retrial submitted during the years 2023 through 2025 illustrate this phenomenon. Clearly, by that point, nearly 20 years had passed since the massacre. Many criminal cases from that era had long since disappeared from public conversation. Yet Erba remained different. Legal teams continued examining evidence. Supporters continued advocating their positions. Journalists continued revisiting old questions. The case maintained a presence in Italian public life that few criminal investigations ever achieve. Despite these efforts, the courts consistently maintained their position. Requests for new proceedings were rejected. The convictions remained in force. Legally, the matter was considered settled. The judicial system had spoken through multiple levels of review, including Italy's highest criminal court. Yet the persistence of public debate demonstrated that legal finality and public acceptance are not always identical concepts. Perhaps this is why the Erba massacre continues to fascinate criminologists, legal scholars, journalists, and ordinary citizens. It forces people to confront difficult questions. How should courts evaluate confessions that are later withdrawn? How reliable is memory after severe trauma? What happens when different pieces of evidence point toward the same conclusion, but critics continue to challenge their interpretation? At what point does a case become truly closed? There may never be universal agreement regarding those questions. What remains beyond dispute, however, is the suffering that began on that December evening. Behind every legal argument stand real victims. Behind every discussion of evidence stand lives that were lost. It is easy, after years of debate, to focus exclusively on court decisions and controversies. Yet the heart of the story remains unchanged. A family was destroyed. A child lost his life. A community experienced a trauma that would shape its memory for decades. Today, the apartment building on Via Armando Diaz is no longer merely a location on a map. It has become part of modern Italian criminal history. For many people, the name Erba immediately evokes memories of a massacre. It evokes images of emergency vehicles, smoke-filled hallways, lengthy court proceedings, and years of public argument. It evokes one of the most shocking crimes of the early 21st century. The passage of time has answered some questions while leaving others unresolved. Courts determined responsibility. Appeals were exhausted. Retrial requests were denied. Yet discussion persists because the case touches something deeper than the specifics of a single investigation. It reflects humanity's enduring desire to understand the truth completely, even when complete certainty remains elusive. In the end, perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Erba massacre is not the controversy itself, but the reminder it provides. Ordinary places can become scenes of extraordinary tragedy. Long-standing conflicts can carry consequences beyond what anyone imagines. The search for justice can continue long after a verdict is delivered, and the memory of victims can outlast every legal debate. For Italy, Erba remains more than a criminal case. It is a chapter of collective memory, a tragedy remembered not only for the violence that occurred, but for the questions that continue to echo through courtrooms, newspapers, and public discussion long after the winter night, when everything changed